Charlotte Mason opened her revolutionary House of Education in 1892, and from 1894, her school was located at Scale Howe in the Lake District, an iconic building which remains on the University of Cumbria's Ambleside campus today. Through her House of Education and the Parents' National Educational Union, PNEU, countless children and educators have benefited from Mason's philosophies and curriculum, which notably revolve around an engagement with literature, nature, and living ideas.
Born to Joshua Mason and Margaret Shaw on January 1, 1842, the inauspicious circumstances of Charlotte Mason's birth were not indicative of the fruitful life she was going to lead. At the time of her birth, Mason's mother was 24 years old, while her father was about to turn 62. The two were married just after Charlotte's second birthday. It was Mr. Mason's third marriage and his 13th child. Both were to be his last. In August of 1854, when Charlotte was 12, she began her pupil-teacher apprenticeship at Holy Trinity's Girls and Infants School. The next few years of her life were quite tumultuous. Her father is recorded living at a separate residence with a male friend, and around this time also her mother grew gravely ill. Margaret Mason died in 1857, and Joshua Mason also passed away just 6 months later. At the age of 16, Charlotte became an orphan. By the end of that year, however, she had successfully passed her pupil-teaching apprenticeship and won a second-class Queen's Scholarship to train at the Home and Colonial Training College in London. In 1861, she became ill and left her training a year early and was appointed mistress of the William Davidson Infantine School in Worthington, Sussex. It was shortly after this, at the age of 22, that she visited Ambleside for the first time to stay with her friend Selina Healy at her school at Lakeland View. A decade later, she was appointed senior governess at the Bishop Otter Memorial College for Gentlewomen. However, she abruptly resigned a few years later for health reasons. It was during this time that she began writing. In 1880, her first book was published. By the end of that decade, the Parents' National Education Union was established, and at the age of 50, Charlotte Mason had opened the House of Education. She spent much of the early 20th century publishing her volumes on education, as well as her collection on the life of Christ in verse. In 1915, her illness came back, and she spent much of her time taking prescribed mineral baths. She once wrote, "I do not wish my life to be written. It is the work that matters. It will live." Charlotte Mason worked until the day that she died on January 16, 1923, at the age of 81.
And her legacy does live on. To this day, Charlotte Mason has an 11 million strong global teaching movement in her name, and her theories are as pertinent now as they were over 100 years ago. She remains an iconic figure in many major countries across the globe where her methods and principles continue.
Charlotte Mason's educational philosophy was revolutionary for its time and is still relevant and utilized today. Summarized, her philosophy entails that children are born persons with the capacity for good or evil, that it is the teacher's job to respect the child in their personhood while training them to respect appropriate authorities through the cultivation of habits. That atmosphere is pivotal, and the natural world is the ideal classroom, not just nature, but their relationship with people and their creator. Furthermore, that living ideas are not only beautiful, but necessary to the formation of the mind, that children are capable of grappling and understanding these ideas and, in fact, already have an appetite for them. That the role of the teacher is simply to present the child with worthy ideas and trust their capability to consume them. In her 6th volume on her philosophy of education, Mason says, "Our great failure seems to me to be caused by the fact that we do not form the habit of reading books that are worthwhile in children while they are at school." She believed that there should be an abundant use of literature, plenty of time spent outdoors exploring, and a development of an appreciation of art, music, and nature, as well as journaling, narration, dictation, and copywork.
In 1987, Susan Schaefer Macaulay wrote a book called For the Children's Sake, which reintroduced parents to Charlotte Mason's methods and philosophy, and it particularly gained traction with a new generation of educators and parents who were questioning the status quo in American public education. Around the same time, Karen Andriola is credited with introducing Charlotte Mason to the United States through the republishing of Mason's original works in the latter part of the 20th century, which has led to a wide implementation of her theories across the country by Christian private educators and homeschooling parents. One of the largest organizations dedicated to preserving and advancing Charlotte Mason's original ideas in a traditional school format is Ambleside Schools International, which takes its name from the town where Charlotte Mason established her first school.
What drew me to Charlotte Mason's philosophy was, as I was learning about it, was the simplicity of it and how it just rang true to how we really are as persons. It wasn't contrived. It wasn't like this emollient that you rubbed on kids and they got educated. It was more like true to life, so created an environment that is, dummied down because they're kids. That's not her view of children. She had such a high view of children. And again, that rings true to experience, right? So she would say they should live in an environment, they should have school in an environment that is comfortable and beautiful and inspiring. And then in my mind, I'm picturing some of the schools I visited that are vinyl and linoleum everywhere, windowless, painted brick, cinder block, not even brick, more institutional feeling than comfortable. So it was this idea of this is a natural way to relate to children. And so that's initially, I think, what drew me to it. And I had just enough experience with traditional education to see the contrast and to desire it greatly for my own young children.
I think I was drawn in different ways. One as a parent, but then also as an educator. And as an educator, I was so struck by the idea that we didn't have to have some sort of system to get behavior a certain way. So it just really appreciated a child's natural desire to know and their curiosity, and it trusted in those things instead of creating all these behavior systems, green lights, red lights, yellow lights, that actually essentially could have a really adverse impact on children's desire to know and their curiosity and how they view themselves. So I think as an educator, that was a big thing that was impressive to me. And I love the word simplicity that she used, because to me, it was this simplicity. Teachers are always trying to come up with the next really cool, fancy way to entertain the kids and get them to do the things you want them to do, and so much busy work. And yet this was such a picture of trusting in a child's capacity. Like you said, a high view of a child. And I really was drawn to that for that reason. And then, of course, the spillover as a parent, as a mom, starting to appreciate, just similarly that you could teach and trust in this high view that we could train them in habits, for example, that if I could show them that I could trust they could learn these things. I could develop habits that would serve them well, whether it was for school or for how they related to people, and that I could get them to practice those things, and that was part of it, whether it was how we make the bed, or it was just such a simpler way to feel and trust in their capability as children.
When I first was learning about Charlotte Mason's ideas for education, the resounding thought was, I wish I had been educated this way. I wish I had been educated this way. And then when I went on to start a school based on her ideas, the number one thing I hear from parents after they learn about her ideas is, I wish I had been educated this way. I wish I had been educated this way. And so what was that way? It was the things we've talked about, like children are persons, treat them as persons, not as little bits of work you've got to kind of massage into some sort of outcome, but just people, and have high expectations of their minds is a huge one. Trust in their curiosity. Don't feel as teachers, we shouldn't feel responsible for everything. Let the natural environment be their teacher also. Things like that.
Charlotte Mason believed in the beneficial processes of nature. Every student of her college kept a nature notebook. Miss Jury, who from 1907 was in charge of the scientific work of the college, said, "We simply choose which way to go, and then nature does the rest, because Ambleside is an unrivaled spot to learn in."
It's been 200 years since Charlotte Mason was born, and the world's changed a lot in that time. And it's interesting that obviously her ideas still live on, but there's a lot of misconception, I think, about the things she emphasized. And kind of after 2 centuries, I guess the thing that is generally emphasized is her love of nature. And to be sure, she loved nature and wanted children to have a relationship with nature. That was huge, very important, still is. But that really wasn't foremost in her pedagogy by any means. That children would have a relationship with life out of doors, that they would be familiar with the plants growing in their neighborhood, the animals they might expect to find, seasons, stars, all of that, was intentional in the curriculum, and a big part of, actually not too big of a part of how they would spend their day, just an expectation. No more important than studying and being, not just studying, but being familiar with great artists and musicians and composers and great writers of great books and mathematicians. So it was not emphasized over any other discipline. I think that just looking back through the lens of history, as we've gotten even more as a society separated from nature, maybe that's why people latch onto that now. Maybe there's a longing for that.
And I think that she acknowledged there were great benefits, just like we would acknowledge that, like as far as keeping a balance to life in general. But aside from that, she talked a little bit about, I know, how it would cultivate the power of observation, just even the noticing, what are we giving attention to, and that those things could be really directed in good ways. That nature was a part of that we could direct a child's attention to these beautiful things in nature, and in a natural way, it would be also an acknowledgement of our creator and the author of creation, and I think she was in touch with that as well, that nature did provide a connection, sometimes in ways that are beyond our understanding, but it was there. Ideas. I would say she recognized ideas on so many levels, and that the job was that we would put children in the way of ideas, and that's what would nourish the mind. And that could come through nature. It could come from good books. It would come through people and the relationships we had with people.
Absolutely.
And the feast. Right?
Like the feast of ideas.
The feast that our job as a teacher would be to lay out this feast. And she would even say, kids take what they need. So we get all panicked as teachers. Did they get it? Did they get it?
But they need a serving of this. They gotta
get that, and I gotta say this, or they'll never get it. And I just don't think she had that kind of anxiety. I think she believed that they take what they need. Our job was really to lay out the feast, and that it could come in a variety of ways. But primarily, she did believe that those ideas would come through books and being in touch with authors.
On the one side, you have the vital importance of ideas. On the other side is how those are mediated to children. So, in other words, the atmosphere that a child learns in has to be one of peace and joy and safety, and it's okay to be me here and make mistakes. I'm not going to be shamed. I may be corrected, but it'll be done in a way that honors me as a person. And so and she said it as, education is an atmosphere. And that's what she meant by that it's a relational atmosphere where there is peace and safety and joy. So in our context here, the way nature study happens is that about an hour of each week is devoted to the study of nature, and specifically each child has a nature notebook, very much like how Charlotte Mason had in her day. The book stays with the child until it's full and they need a new one. And so during this hour, they will ideally go out somewhere on the schoolyard where there's a garden or some plants growing, or on a field study, take in a specimen somehow. Sometimes specimens are brought in, but that's not really the way it's supposed to be done. We want to see nature in its natural setting, and the child is, like Val was saying, the children are asked to observe in quiet, and so they'll take some time just to look at it, talk about what they notice, which is narrating what they notice, and then after, assuming earlier instruction in dry brush, watercolor technique, or drawing, they'll spend about 30 minutes rendering the specimen in their nature journal. And sometimes, if there's time, can write little poems they're learning in there, if it is something that strikes them, or notes about the time of day, that sort of thing.
And then I would just add too that so much of the literature that they engage, whether it's Black Beauty or Narnia, or I was thinking even of they read Helen Keller, and her descriptions of nature are they're so beautiful and rich, that I think that that's also a way that they get this exposure to just the importance of acknowledging nature and giving attention to it.
Charlotte Mason believed in using living books to educate children, using authors that were written in a narrative style where the author is passionate and often an expert in their field. Living books are engaging and inspiring and begin conversations about real experiences that children can learn from. These books should display imagination, originality, and the human touch.
So a living book is a book, like its name implies, it comes alive. There's sort of a living, eternal quality to it, where the author, it's like they're in the room telling you the story. You're just enveloped in it. And so it's written in literary style, as Charlotte Mason would say, and it's devoid of twaddle, which we don't really use that word, but she used it a lot. Just sort of that oversimplification, dumbing down. It is a book that has stood the test of time, so it's timeless in that sense. What else?
That rich in ideas that would really foster thought and discussion and questions. And new ideas like she said, ideas have a life of their own. And so kind of one thing leading to another. If you're in a classroom, you just see it bounce from one, and this, and it's alive, I don't know how else to say.
Charlotte Mason also writes about how children know. Children do not miss hypocrisy in adults. And so, again, she had such respect for their minds, and as it relates to faith and the things of God, she just gave no quarter to, anything false, anything pretentious, anything hypocritical. It had to be genuine, real, alive, attractive. And isn't that what we want? I mean, if we're going to have faith, shouldn't it be something like that? Not, oh, how exciting, a list of rules I need to follow and weight I need to carry. No, there was none of that for her. Charlotte Mason really emphasized for parents and teachers, this primary goal of leading children to an intimate knowledge and relationship with the God who really, really loved them. That is written explicitly, that it was the primary task of the educator and the parent to basically introduce them to God.
I think she thought too, though, that there was a level of abdicating that authority, and she was really pained by that idea that parents weren't really taking that seriously. And I was thinking about one of my favorite things that she's ever written. There's a section where she gives this incredibly beautiful description of Jesus that has, it's so rich and beautiful.
Charlotte Mason's methods have not been without criticism. During our research work looking through Mason's archives held at the Armitt, we came across something both illuminating and very shocking. We found letters from Elsie Kitching to the then recently appointed head of the House of Education, detailing the rejection of a Jewish student wishing to join the school based on religious grounds. Charlotte Mason's theories haven't been restrictive or exclusionary in their intention, but the way in which they've been applied by those utilising her philosophy has contributed to prejudice, and in this case, anti-Semitism. Elsie Kitching, who knew Miss Mason intimately and was serving as the director of the Parents' Union School and the editor of the Parents' Review following Mason's death in 1923, argued against the exclusion of a student based on religious grounds, claiming that she knew Mason best above all, and although her theories were rooted in Christianity, she never would have wished for the benefits of her lessons to only be experienced by Christians. The head of the school argued that without a foundation of Christian faith, the Jewess, as she was referred to by the head, would not be able to fully partake in the classes, and she would be disadvantaged in the lessons by this lack of shared principles. Although Kitching fervently argued against this, stating that the classes offered by the school would be within the students' capabilities, and that she showed a clear passion both for literature and nature studies, the religious discord could not be settled, and the Jewish student never joined the cohort at the House of Education.
Charlotte Mason's theories were not intended to be discriminatory, but in some instances they have been used as an excuse to alienate certain groups, and in doing so have exposed some of the limits to her philosophy. This was not her desire. Mason sought to inspire a lifelong curiosity and search for knowledge. In Home Education, she penned what has come to be one of her most well-known quotes: "All education is self-education." She postulates that the teacher cannot confer education, but that they are merely a guide. Teachers are to present a feast of ideas, and the choice of what to partake is up to the student. Mason likens this idea to that of a child's coloring book. They can be handed the outline, but it is the student's job to fill in the color.
All education is self-education. It's sort of like that. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The only education we truly get is the one we want for ourselves. Again, that laying the feast idea. We want to set the table beautifully. We want it to be a great space. We want to make everybody feel like they have a place here at this table. And then they need to come partake of their own initiative and curiosity. And again, that is something in our, in the 21st century, 2023, we have challenges to that. And so we have to, as a school, work with our parents to help support that curiosity, because, in the same way the old school dry education can put a wet towel on curiosity, in the same way, too much screen time, passively, being passive instead of active, can also put a wet blanket on a child's desire to know.
And I think what's so interesting about that the idea of all education is self-education is that as a teacher in the classroom, as you get to know your students, you see the ways where they may have weaknesses. So if for one, it might be that he has all kinds of things to say. He can narrate beautifully, but when you ask him to put it on paper, he's not going to do his part. He's not going to do the work. He's not going to enter into it. For another student, it might be they don't have much to say, but boy, they're going to put their thoughts down carefully and beautifully, but they need to grow in how to give that attention to get to more detail, So it's interesting, but they each have their things, but they have to do their part to continue growing in those things. We can't do it for them. I can't write it for you. I can't tell back for you. And the only way that you grow and you continue to grow in relationship with the things that we're putting out there is to do your part. And it could be, what are you giving attention to? What are you curious about? Yeah, lazy, just whatever it is. But we all have them. We all have our things. And so in order to continue to grow, that there's a part they have to do and they have to enter in.
Curiosity is king in education. I think that's another way of thinking about it. Because if you're not curious to know whatever the thing is, how are you going to come into the knowledge of that thing, and that it's really a part of you, which is what Charlotte Mason wanted and envisions. Education is something that becomes a part of us, the things that our loves are, the things we become intimate with and care about.
Being in an atmosphere where kids, and again, it kind of speaks to that atmosphere, but they would actually, when you said, okay, it's time to take out Charlotte's Web, yes, just or read aloud. Oh, guys, we got time for read aloud today. And to hear everybody go, yes, and celebrate. They can't wait. Oh, and then when you're done, they go, oh, oh, it's done, they can't wait. I think that's such a picture of.
Yeah, I remember a student once, it was picture day, in the third grade class. It was their turn to come in and get their pictures taken, and there's this one little boy who's quite sullen. And so I went up to him and said, are you okay? You don't seem very happy. And he was like, we're just wasting time in here. I want to go back to class and finish Little Maid of Old Connecticut. We got lots of those little stories, don't we?
Many, many, many of them.
When Charlotte Mason first arrived in Ambleside in 1891, she knew immediately that this was the place from which she wanted to educate her governesses. In an article clipping found in the archive written by John P. Inman, Miss Mason was asked, why Ambleside? She explained, Ambleside is far from London, but in view of that fact, there is much to say in its favour. Students will be impressed with the great natural beauty around them, will find a country rich in wildflowers, mosses and ferns. They will learn to know and love the individuality of great natural features, mountain, pass, valley, lake and waterfall. She believed that the Lake District will always attract people of lively minds and talents. The location that her philosophies were taught from has been influential not only to her ideologies, but also to the children's literature genre itself.
There can be few ideas in Western culture as intimately connected and intertwined as nature and the child. Charlotte Mason claimed that Ambleside is an unwalled university all dedicated to plain living and high thinking. This doesn't only speak to her love for the Lake District, but it also reveals her perception of the outside world as a place for education and high thinking, where children's relationship with nature can provide them with a unique experience to develop and grow. Where lessons occur beyond the remit of a classroom and instead can take place whenever one is immersed in the outdoors or engrossed in a good book. She encouraged the pursuit of compelling ideas, and using her philosophies in a literary analysis has provided us with a new, compelling way in which to consider these classics of children's literature. She once advised that you should never be without a really good book in hand, and we have certainly looked at some novels today that constitute as good books, not only for children, but adults too. These stories have showcased the potential of children when they work together, consider things from the perspective of others, and develop a strong connection with the world around them, encouraging neither parents, educators, nor authors to underestimate the capability of children when they are presented with a worthwhile challenge.
Hundreds of thousands of children have enjoyed a living education, and their parents and educators have learned and grown right alongside them for over 100 years. Her work has endured because her methods are flexible and leave scope for children to develop in their own ways. For 100 years, her work has continued, respecting children as whole persons, centralizing their relationships with nature and the world around them, and giving them a living education that helps them to grow in all areas of personhood. We ourselves have benefited from Charlotte Mason's educational philosophy from our time at Ambleside School of Ocala, and we believe that it is because of her methods of education that we have a deeper appreciation for the books we read as children and the relationship we have developed with nature. Charlotte Mason has left a wonderful legacy and a fascinating framework through which to critique children's literature. Her approach is not just about academics. It is a philosophy and lifestyle that shapes the way children relate to the world around them. In keeping with the books that we have analyzed, her philosophy encourages time spent in nature and an immersement in living ideas to better the minds and spirits of children. Essex Chamonix wrote, "The work of Charlotte Mason is full of vitality in the changed conditions of the present day. With thankfulness, it can be said that the thought lives, the work goes on." On my arrival at Ambleside, I was interviewed by Miss Mason, who asked me for what purpose I had come. I replied, "I have come to learn to teach." Miss Mason said, "My dear, you have come here to learn to live."